In line with earlier expectations by market experts, the Bank of Korea today announced intentions to lower its key lending rate by 25 basis points to 2.75%. We have more on this decision in our panel discussion. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective. It's Tuesday, February 25th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. The central bank has lowered both the benchmark interest rate and its outlook for the Korean economy this year. So why and what does this mean? To answer this question and more, I have Daniel Moss, a columnist for Bloomberg Opinion, live on the line. Daniel, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Good to be here, Sunny.
I also have Professor Oh Joon-seok at Sookmyung Women's University with the pundit's take on the economy. Professor Oh, as always, it's great to have you on.
Pleasure is mine.
Right, Daniel, we'll start with you. Let's begin with your assessment of the Bank of Korea's latest monetary policy decision.
Well, Sunny, as you said in your introduction, this was widely anticipated by most economists. In fact, I'm yet to find one that did not anticipate this move. The real question is, given the sluggish economy, the prolonged political crisis that's weighing on consumer sentiment and business sentiment, why didn't the Bank of Korea go further? It signaled more cuts are coming. A reduction of, say, 50 basis points would have shown firmly that despite the political tumult, someone is leading this economy, and that someone is, for good or ill, the Bank of Korea. Now, it's true, no one elected them, but when a crisis comes along, central banks do find themselves front and center. They can ride to the rescue quite quickly. They'll be second-guessed afterwards. But nevertheless, Governor Rhee is the man of the moment. I would have been really impressed had they opted for a half percentage point cut. Inflation is more or less at the central bank's target. As you said, they've lowered their growth forecasts. That would have been a real shot in the arm to see that today. I would have been seriously impressed.
Right, and speaking about the Bank of Korea's lowering of its growth outlook for this year, Professor Oh, the central bank did lower the outlook for South Korea's economy for 2025 to 1.5%. What do you believe are the broader implications, Professor Oh, of this latest outlook?
The BOK projected Korea's GDP growth to be 1.9% in 2025, and the BOK also projected CPI inflation to be 1.9% in 2025. BOK typically announces its growth projection 4 times a year: February, May, August, and November. This time, the BOK released a very rare January projection ahead of its official outlook and adjustment next month, which might be interpreted the BOK might be prepared to take some measures from the perspective of economic urgency rather than economic stability or sustainability. The Bank of Korea revised to lower its growth forecast for the country's economy this year from its previous 1.9% to 1.6% in January projection, as Sonny mentioned, citing political uncertainties surrounding President Yoon's related with martial law and its impact on consumer confidence. When you practice medical checkup of the macroeconomy, there is commonality. Mostly expert check CIG and X-M variable. Let's start from the CNI. Consumption and investment. Korea is grappling with weak private consumption and weak investment due mainly to high borrowing cost. It should be lowered. Good reason for lowering interest rate. Korea's export rose 4.6% from a year earlier to US $57.5 billion in October, marking the 13th straight monthly gain. But it was the smallest increase since March, not to mention all political uncertainties, sagging domestic demand inside of Korea, global trade environment outside, will become tougher in 2025. The second phase of Trump administration, fortified by the U.S. Isolationism, will add fuel to the trade protectionism, which might be expected to slow export growth of semiconductor and car industry in Korea. Now, what's left? Only G in the hand. Expansionary fiscal policy, presenting such a bleak outlook and stressing the need to spur the growth. It is so natural and to the point that the BOK slashed this key rate by a 0.25 percentage point. And it is also natural the pace of economic policies, such as aggressive supplementary budgets, will impact the future path of economics of Korea. What should be controlled is the inflationary pressure, as Mr. Daniel commented.
Right. And before we delve deeper into the situation here on the local front, Daniel, beyond borders, what can you tell us about the monetary policy directions of central banks of major economies, including the U.S.?
Well, Sunny, the direction is clearly down. Now, nothing is linear in life. The Federal Reserve cut by a full percentage point in the second half of 2024. Most economists think there's still some more where that came from. They're going to wait, have a look-see, evaluate what policies of President Trump are actually implemented, and see where inflation goes. As Jay Powell has said, they need to be comfortable that inflation is approaching their average of 2% over time. People often say the target's 2%. Actually, it's an average of 2% over time. And that can give them a little more wiggle room. In Europe, where the economic picture is far bleaker, the European Central Bank is bringing down interest rates quickly. We've seen some easing in China, but hopes for a large-scale stimulus have largely been dashed. Japan is going in the other direction, but I don't think any economy would want to have the experience Japan has had over the prior 3 decades. So this is an environment where, broadly speaking, borrowing costs have come down and will come down. That's the environment the Bank of Korea is operating on. Now, look, I've given them some credit. They were first to move in 2021. Many central banks didn't get going with their hikes until 2022. They've adopted a cautious approach on the way down. So what I'm saying is, is caution really warranted given the sluggish nature of the economy and the way the political imbroglio appears to be weighing on sentiment. They do have some constraints on what they're doing. The won had an awful fourth quarter. It's down about 11%, the worst performing major Asian currency. So far this month, well, this month is almost done, it's been doing pretty good. So I think, again, I just want to stress, it's great that interest rates are coming down in Korea. I think the BOK could have done a little more today.
Right, which you mentioned earlier as well. And also staying here in Korea, Professor Oh, speaking about February, findings for the first 20 days of February show the total value of Korean exports rose 16% on year. But I hear that based on an average daily calculation, Professor Oh, we are actually down 2.7% as February this year had 15.5 working days during the first 3 weeks, while last year, February had 13 days. Professor Oh, what are your thoughts regarding this particular finding?
Relatively speaking, so far so good. The Korean economy is like sitting up. The international trade environment has changed. Korean exports have increased for 15 consecutive months from October 2023 to December 24. However, last month, exports reversed their trend due to a significant reduction in working days during the Lunar New Year holiday. By item, semiconductor export amounted to 6.5 billion, and export of passenger car were 3.6 billion US dollars, up 40.3%. Steel increased 2.5 billion, up 11.4%. Shipbuilding 23.5%. Precision instrument, computers, and peripherals also shows very, very prosperous improvement. However, export of petroleum product minus 9.7%, and home appliance minus 15% decreased. From now, the heavy dependency on export to the U.S. and China raised concern about the need for diversification. Protectionist policies of the U.S. are expected to lead to a decline in export incline and import to and from the United States. Imports from China decreased by 1.7%. Imports from the United States increased by 13.8% already. Imports from Russia decreased by 10.6%. Until now, Korean economy managed barely to hold the current trend of trade. That is why I'm talking that so far so good. Good news is for the entire month of February, export of semiconductor, computer, and automobiles are expected to show positive trend, leading to a rebound in export growth and a return to a surplus in the trade balance. But nobody there to forecast afterward due to uncertainties of trade wars and the protectionism of the United States.
Right, uncertainty right now. But for last year, Daniel, auto exports from Korea to the U.S. actually marked a record high. Now, some are casting doubt on this year's performance amid the threat of Trump tariffs. Others remain hopeful, citing possible gains given the trade tensions between Washington and Beijing. What are your thoughts, Daniel?
Well, if you zoom out a bit, Sunhee, one of the things that's going on here is that the US economy entered this year with tremendous momentum relative to just about anywhere else. You know, the last business day before President Trump was sworn in for his second term, the IMF released its World Economic Outlook. Pretty respected benchmark for global forecasting. The big story there was the way the US had broken away from the rest of the world. So it's not particularly surprising that American consumers bought more Korean autos. They bought more of pretty much anything from everywhere. I guess the big question is, you know, does President Trump wreck it? The US and South Korea do have a free trade agreement ratified in 2012, which aimed at eliminating almost all, or in fact all, tariff barriers between the two countries. So there's a lot of threats that President Trump has made, a lot of things he's ordered. Let's see what's implemented. But regards reciprocal tariffs, at least in that regard, Korea ought to be in some pretty respectable shape.
Right, and staying with that, Daniel, the Korean delegation was in Washington last week and formally requested an exemption from Trump tariffs in light of the free trade agreement that you mentioned. Of course, U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick spoke about having at least a $1 billion investment by Korean companies in the U.S. to qualify for business support. How feasible is that plan, an investment of at least $1 billion by companies, foreign companies in the U.S. to qualify for any sort of support from the U.S.? Daniel.
Well, it depends on what companies we're talking about. If you're talking about Kia or Hyundai, which already have substantial manufacturing in North America, it should be fairly straightforward. I suspect what the Trump team is interested in is a big press conference, a photo opportunity, and a pledge of something whose total value might amount to the figure you mentioned. There's a certain amount of showmanship in all of this. And look, large companies are sometimes critiqued for moving slowly. They're also quite adaptable. I wonder whether one lesson might be the way Japanese automakers began setting up manufacturing operations in the United States in the 1980s to head off protectionist sentiment. A lot of the Japanese cars sold in North America are made substantially in North America. And it wouldn't surprise me if it was the same with Korea. So there was a slight tweak to the US-Korea FTA during Trump's first term. which the president claimed enabled more more American automakers to sell their products in South Korea. Look, there's always room for compromise. He's a transactional guy. We'll see what happens, but people will do what they can to get a slice of this, what's the world's largest consumer market.
Right. Staying with tariffs, but moving beyond Korea and the U.S., Professor Oh, the government here in South Korea is looking into anti-dumping tariffs on Chinese steel plates entering the Korean market. Could you give us some background information regarding this particular move and its relevance?
The fact is that the government will impose up to 38.02% anti-dumping tariff on steel plate from China, accepting Hyundai Steel's claim that the oversupply of low-priced Chinese products has damaged the domestic industry. But from my experience in practice, major trade partner countries have their own sore fingers, which means weak point. In the United States, poultry industry or a chicken factory it might be a sore finger. Steel and tire industry in China, wine and semi-truck industry in the United States. This might be very, very good leveraging tools. In this respect, Korea will be likely to take leveraging using these issues when the second phase of the FTA negotiation goes on between China and Korea. This is the renegotiation period. The Korea Trade Commissioner has recommended the Ministry of Economy and Finance to impose provisional anti-dumping duties equivalent to each Chinese steel plate supplier's dumping margin. When the finance ministry agreed to a recommendation, Xiangtan, Jinor, and then Xiamen will each slapped with 38.02% of tariff immediately. Jiangsu, Shangang will face 29.62%, and then Baoshan 27.91% of tariff will be levied. The latest measure came after Hyundai Steel filed an anti-dumping complaint last July, claiming that the import of low-priced thick steel plates from China has hurt its business. Thick steel plates are used mainly in shipbuilding and construction. It is very, very related with the competitiveness of shipbuilding in Korea. Korean steel makers have complained that their Chinese rivals have dumped thick steel plates, which erodate the Korea's competitiveness. Which means that Korean steel makers have complained Chinese rivals they dumped thick steel plates, and then amid this oversupply of Chinese product, the domestic steel makers and shipbuilders have locked horns with each other for more than happy years, failing to reach an agreement on the thick steel plate price for the second half of last year. So the Commission's recent decision is therefore expected to alleviate burden on the struggling domestic steelmakers in one part, facing U.S. President Trump's threat of imposing a 25 tariff threat. But on the other hand, the shipbuilders will experience a rise in their own production cost, which will lose the global price competitiveness ever afterwards.
Right, I see. And Daniel, generally speaking, I understand it might be a tricky question for you, but speaking as a pundit looking into the situation here in South Korea, how would you evaluate Korea's efforts to address Mr. Trump's blanket tariff campaign? Daniel, I'm afraid your audio is off. We can't hear you.
Sorry, Sunny, could you repeat the question?
I was just wondering what you thought about, what your thoughts were with regard to Korea's efforts to address Mr. Trump's tariff plans.
Well, by all means, Korea should make its case. There's no guarantee of success. To an extent, President Trump fancies himself as someone who can smell weakness. If Korea appears too desperate, that's probably not a great thing. On the other hand, Korea is a firm ally of the United States, a strong strategic partner. It's making the memory chips that American companies linked to AI want. There's no reason why Korea should appear overly defensive. Look, the administration's got a lot of wind in its sails. It's the first month. There's no sense that certainly the trade actions are harming Trump in the polls. There's a lot of other things going on aside from trade that he's doing. But look, Korea and others have no choice other than to make their case. I would suggest not doing so from a perceptive position of weakness might be helpful.
Right, I see. All right, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Daniel, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts today. And Professor Oh, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you for having me.
Right, well, that brings us to the end of this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching and see you back here same time tomorrow.